This exhibition really began with an invitation from SCI-Arc's director, Hernan Diaz Alonso, who invited Herwig and I to curate a show dealing with aspects of the environment, different attitudes toward nature. So we began to think about this term environmental, the way in which we begin to reconsider the built environment around us and to think a bit about the future. What's happening to all these structures that get built, that get torn down? What is the possibility for this built environment to have another life after its intended use? Where do these things go? Because they don't just go away. We looked at bringing together in the gallery a kind of collection of different attitudes about environment. And so we invited several different participants, a landscape architect and several architects, to all propose interventions in the gallery.
When we conceptualized the exhibition, we thought about a difficult landscape in a way. So it's a sloping plane that kind of cuts through the gallery, that was constructed and then filled with recycled concrete from different buildings in Los Angeles. So it's kind of like the material itself has a history of construction. And embedded in that landscape is a series of tank caps, which we used to fill with landscape that was designed by Günther Vogt's office, or to fill with other elements like, for example, extracted tar from the La Brea tar pits as a representation of environmental element in Los Angeles. We also have a series of participants that are being projected into the other kind of steel bowls that are filled with water. And the projects being projected within those really are representative of environmental approaches in architecture and design. Coop Himmelb's project is a building that is shaped by environmental forces and then kind of like produces energy, attempting a net zero footprint. There's other projects like Gilles Retsin's project that really thinks about issues of assembly and disassembly and reassembly, multiple uses of materials and how it could be assembled and reused and reapplied and have multiple lives that way. So it is different generations, different approaches to that topic.
I think that first and foremost, it's a critical commentary, sort of asking the visitors to the exhibition to really think about the things that are around them, think about the infrastructure that is really just outside the walls of this gallery. The Los Angeles River was a huge reference in this project. The concrete channel of the river, imagining a future where that channel gets displaced, gets broken up, transported to another site, reconstituted as a landscape. The 6th Street Bridge, literally walking on the remnants of that. It makes us actually stop and consider what is the life cycle of the things we build around us and what might we do, how might they take on another life.
Specifically in Los Angeles, I think buildings have relatively short lifespan. They are torn down after 20 years, and then we really ask ourselves what happens to that. And often I would say the approach to sustainability has been, oh, we have a problem, we need to solve it through technology. And that sure is one possibility how to approach this, but it doesn't really address some sort of a change in attitude about like how are we dealing with materials over a longer lifespan? Can it be used multiple times? And ultimately, could that lead to a new type of tectonics or like an urban landscape? So like, how is this relevant for designers again? You know, and I think that's really what we want to take on, that we want to take this on as a design problem, as an architectural problem, not just as a technology problem, and being able to create something new out of this material.
This idea of authenticity, of multiple histories, of different narratives that we attach to things and sites. So the collection of things that are in the space, the pieces of the building detritus, the water cistern caps, all of those things have been extracted from their original sites, their original use as infrastructural elements, as part of the built environment. And now we see them in a completely different way. They take on new roles, we project new narratives onto them.
The exhibition is about environment, but environment is finally, in a city like Los Angeles, it's more than only landscape, but finally we brought this very urban landscape in Los Angeles into the exhibition space. And it's always difficult to show landscape in the gallery environment, let's say. And we were interested in this production of urban situations. We did intense research about what is the common ground of Los Angeles, where we live. And then it was about mainly the water, then this tar or this oil production in the early 20th century, and then how it was transformed. And of course, what you see here, it's coming materially from a construction site. And this was interesting for us. The urban geology is not really a stone or stones or rocks. It's really this solid building construction. we like to have these people coming to see this show. It's a very direct exchange, so it's no explanations, but no explanation what you really see. And first of all, you don't really feel safe walking in such a landscape, and that was interesting for us. So you have to look down, and so that means the information we put in here about this urban landscape is in the ground. A city is like a geological monument. Landscape is more interesting because it's related to culture, and it's not only architectural culture, it can be agriculture, whatever. And this relation to a society finally, and again, it's a common ground idea. And when we work in such a situation like here, we are somehow geomorphic agents.
As we started to research, we realized that there were all these different layers to the history of the city. We started to think about a way of telling these parallel stories through a more haptic sort of approach.
Normally what we do is when doesn't matter what kind of task or question there is, we always start in a really big scale. So we actually started the discussion with Günther all together by zooming out, not only looking into LA, but the bigger region and California or even the whole country.
Especially when we talk about environmental and the idea of environment in our age. It brought us back to some of the core elements of our own practice, and water being a very important one. We began to research about where water actually came from. When we realized the water problem of Los Angeles, first of all, we came to the Los Angeles River, which is a very particular kind of river, heavily full of concrete, channelized. And then we started to look back to the origins and where it came from, realized that the journey of this river brought it through the Mojave Desert, encapsulated in this infrastructure that at the same time started to create these infrastructural landscapes. The actual origin of the water is an old lake, which no longer exists, and which is also part of a reclamation project, which of course brought in questions about what is natural, and is it natural to restore something that was natural? Is the restoring already not natural? And we started to get into these kinds of questions.
The idea was to bring the topic of water into the exhibition in a very abstract way instead of actually showing the water as an element physically. The idea was to create an atmosphere with a different type of installation. And the mapping of the LA River, we thought that from the beginning, from the Owens Valley to where it goes into the ocean, having different recordings of the water, even when it's not there, you only hear the traffic of the highway next to the river, and in some places you actually hear the water, would be an interesting way to bring this topic of water into the gallery.
I think when somebody that is in the field of architecture, today the word environmental, many things come to your mind. To my mind specifically is full of technical issues, complex ones, political issues, social questions that are really challenging. I think probably the environmental questions are the most challenging and controversial ones at the moment. All this complexity of the technicalities, the economical, the social and the political comes to your mind. We also feel that there is a need of spreading and making it understandable how all these technical compromise that we can take as architects with ecology can be understood by inhabitants and citizens. What we have tried to do is propose a hook that is architects can build you a forest, or we as architects can build you a forest, and then try to explain how this can work in 6 different ways. In all of the different angles, from this idea of, for example, replicating patterns to the idea of working with renewable materials that spontaneously grow in the same proportion in nature. What we try to combine, again, the technical compromise, the numbers, the performance, with an image that is engaging.
The first thought was almost like, how is my work environmental? But then immediately ideas started to come up to look at environment not as something natural necessarily, or not as something green, but something that you can understand much more as a system of production that starts to access questions about labor, that starts to access questions about systems of production, the impact that it has on the landscape, and kind of really taking a distance from the idea that it would be necessarily green. So my piece from the very beginning was black, and I was also from the beginning, when these ideas about tar and oil started to come up, very interested in like working with these materials and doing a piece that kind of responds to this blackness as well. The piece is deliberately very ambiguous, so it's not an architectural model, it's not a building, it's really, in a way, I've titled the piece A Bunch of of boxes, which is a kind of a very humble title. And in a way, the piece is really an investigation into systems of production. So it's almost infrastructural. It's an ambiguous model. The aspect of discreteness is, of course, embedded in the building element itself, right? So there are a series of generic building blocks, boxes, that are put together into a variety of structures. And I think it's also important to understand that there is a kind of a social and like political aspect to these elements as well. Like I really understand them as digital, not in the sense of being like a formal project. It's never about the kind of looking at the digital in this case to make something, to define an overall form, but it's more looking at the digital as a production chain. So it's talking about how the digital could actually enable very cheap materials that are normally not used for construction, how those materials could become productive, and because of the fact that they are so cheap, also could increase access for people to this kind of construction. So it's kind of removing, in a way, construction from capital. It's shortcutting construction. And I think that's actually also the aspect that I like in the gallery, because it's set up on concrete rubble. And in a way, it's set on a kind of, it's almost like a kind of a residue of an old system of production that required lots of capital, that was based also on this economy of oil, right? And the piece is super lightweight, it's highly detailed, and it's kind of talking about another type of economy, which is this like post-capitalist economy.
We are in this global warming scenario. Crucial, architecture is 40% of the CO2 emissions, so today we must think green. For sure, architecture is the number one cause. We are responsible or not. It's really up on us. So the idea is that architecture deals with science towards this idea of architecture of particles. We are in this crucial scenario where we have this concrete, 1 centimeter of concrete, like this, all this concrete we have here on the floor, but we have a seat. And we as architects, we have to decide whether we go concrete or seat. What is this going to perform for us? Weight, strength, not much. But a seed is going to produce energy, is going to produce food, is going to turn into a factory of oxygen, is going to be a factory of factories, is going to produce for us. It's going to mutate, it's going to learn, it knows where the wind is, where the sun is. Should we do architecture this way or this way? It's a very simple question. And today the debate is centered in this exhibition about that. So this is not an exhibition. Yes, it's an exhibition, but it's not an exhibition because it's rather a first act of activism.